On the night Daniel Cole first understood that people could disappear without anyone really seeing them, he was 8 years old and hiding in the hallway outside his parents' bedroom. The house was small, a weather-beaten rental on the edge of a tired Midwestern town. The walls were thin, the carpet worn to threads. Through the crack of the bedroom door, he could hear his father's voice, low and slurred, followed by the sharp, pleading tone of his mother. Then the thud. Then the silence. Daniel knew that silence too well. It was the kind that made the air feel heavy, like the whole house was holding its breath. He crouched on the floor, knees pulled tight to his chest, staring at the jumble of shoes by the door. His mother's black pumps lay on their side, one strap twisted, the heel worn smooth. Next to them, his father's boots were splattered with oil and dried mud, a pair of heavy bricks waiting to move. He should have been afraid of the boots. Instead, his eyes kept drifting back to the pumps. They looked like something from another world, shiny, delicate, almost fragile. He reached out and traced a finger along the curve of one heel, feeling the smooth surface under his skin. In the middle of the chaos, the shoe was strangely perfect. Another crash came from the bedroom, then a muffled sob. He flinched, put the shoe back exactly where it had been, and pressed himself against the wall. If he stayed quiet enough, his father might forget he existed tonight. Sometimes that worked. Sometimes it didn't. Daniel's childhood passed in a series of such nights, smashed dishes, raised voices, apologies that always came too late. His father, Mark, worked at a local factory and drank away most of what he earned. His mother, Claire, moved like a ghost through the house, always trying to keep the peace, always failing. School wasn't much of a refuge either. Daniel was small, pale, and quiet, the kind of boy other kids forgot about until they needed someone to push around. He learned early that being invisible was safer. He spoke when spoken to. He walked with his head down. He kept his hands folded neatly on his desk. But invisibility had a cost. The more people overlooked him, the more he retreated into a private world where nothing belonged to anyone else. It started with his mother's shoes. When he was 10, Claire saved for months to buy a pair of red heels from the bargain store in town. She wore them only on Sundays, walking to church with careful steps like she was afraid the pavement would chip them. One afternoon when she was out hanging laundry, Daniel stood in the doorway of her bedroom, staring at the red shoes leaning together under the chair. The curtains were drawn halfway, stripes of light cutting across the faded carpet. Before he could think better of it, he slipped his feet into them. They were far too big. His heels lifted out with every step, but as he shuffled across the room, something inside him went quiet, the part that was always braced for shouting, for a slammed door, for the sudden sting of a hand across his face. In the mirror, he barely recognized himself. The shoes made him taller, thinner, sharper at the edges. Not Daniel from the factory house. Someone else. Someone who couldn't be pushed around so easily. When he heard the back door open, he yanked them off and shoved them under the bed, heart pounding. He put them back later, carefully, so no one would know. But he knew. And once he knew, it was impossible to forget. By 13, he had moved from trying on his mother's shoes to quietly borrowing them, waiting until she fell asleep to creep into her room and slip them on, one pair after another. He memorized the weight and feel of each one. He noticed how the leather creased near the toes, how the straps loosened over time. When his father's temper grew worse, the shoes became more than objects. They were an escape, a secret place he could go where nothing smelled like stale beer and cold anger. Soon, the shoes in the house weren't enough. At 14, he pocketed his first stolen item. It happened in a crowded thrift store downtown, where he went on Saturday afternoons to wander the aisles and avoid going home. A pair of tan wedges sat on a low shelf, slightly scuffed but still pretty. He picked one up, pretending to examine the size. No one was looking. The clerk was arguing with a customer. A baby was crying somewhere in the back. Without allowing himself to hesitate, he slipped one shoe under his oversized hoodie, then its partner. He walked out with his hands in his pockets, sweat collecting at the back of his neck. No alarm sounded. No one called out. No one stopped him. At home, in his small, cluttered room, he lined the shoes up under his bed next to an old cardboard box of comic books. He told himself it was just a one-time thing. Something he'd never do again. But the rush, the jolt of fear and relief, the feeling that he had taken something and no one had even seen him, stayed with him long after he pushed the shoes out of sight. The first time anyone noticed something was off, it was almost by accident. When Daniel was 15, a neighbor named Sarah Miller, a college student who lived 2 doors down, reported that several items had gone missing from the communal laundry room in their building. A pair of flats. A silk blouse. 2 lace bras. The landlord shrugged it off as carelessness. Maybe she'd left them somewhere. Maybe someone else had taken them by mistake. Only Daniel knew the truth. On the night Sarah had left her laundry in the basement, Daniel had been on his way back from taking out the trash. The room had been empty, the hum of the old machines echoing off the concrete walls. Her clothes were folded in a neat stack on top of a dryer. The flat sat on the floor beside it, toes perfectly aligned. It had been so easy. Too easy. A week later, when a patrol car appeared outside the building and an officer knocked on their door to ask if anyone had seen anything suspicious, Mark slammed the door in his face, outraged at the idea that someone in his house could be a thief. Daniel stood in the kitchen, heart hammering, his eyes glued to the small black duffel bag hidden behind the cleaning supplies under the sink. That night, his father hit him for looking shifty while the officer was talking. Daniel didn't cry. He just stared at the patterned linoleum floor and thought about the bag. About the shoes and the fabric and the way his fingers had trembled when he touched them. If they made him this angry, he thought, maybe they were powerful. Maybe he was, too. 2 months later, after a fight that left his mother with a split lip and his father with bruised knuckles, school finally intervened. A teacher noticed the yellowing marks on Daniel's arm and the way he flinched when someone touched him. A social worker was called. Questions were asked behind closed doors. Daniel sat in a small office, staring at a framed poster of a sunset while a woman with kind eyes asked him if he felt safe at home. He lied. Yes, he said. Everything's fine. The social worker didn't believe him. A week later, he was sitting in a different room, this one with softer lighting and a box of tissues on the table, across from a man who introduced himself as Dr. Harris, a psychiatrist. Dr. Harris asked about his father. About the yelling. About the bruises. Then, gently, he asked about the bag under the sink. Dr. Harris watched Daniel with a calm, unreadable expression, the sort of gaze that didn't budge no matter how much the boy shifted in his chair. The office was warm, dim, and smelled faintly of coffee. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Daniel kept his arms folded, his eyes locked on the rug under his feet, a faded green circle with frayed edges. Daniel, Dr. Harris said quietly, I know there are things you're not telling me. A long silence followed. The boy's jaw tightened. His fingers curled into his sleeves. The question hung between them like a weight. Finally, Daniel murmured, It's nothing. Dr. Harris didn't push, not at first. That was what unnerved Daniel most. The psychiatrist let silence fill the room, letting the boy grow uncomfortable enough to keep talking. You've been taking things, Dr. Harris said eventually. Shoes. Clothes. Items that don't belong to you. Daniel's head jerked up, startled. His pulse surged. How do you? Your mother found the bag, Dr. Harris explained gently. She didn't know what to do. She wanted to help you. Daniel's cheeks flushed hot. Shame hit him like a wave, both burning and cold. He imagined his mother's face when she had unzipped the duffel, the rows of shoes neatly wrapped in towels, the folded clothes, the items he had arranged so carefully. A private world exposed. "She told your father," Dr. Harris added. But he dismissed it. Of course he had. Mark Cole believed only in things he could yell at or strike. Dr. Harris leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. "Daniel, when you take these items, what do you feel?" The boy swallowed. He tried to speak, but the words jammed in his throat. What could he even say? That touching the shoes made his heart race in a strange, electric way. That slipping them on in the dark made him feel less like a thin, brittle boy and more like someone in control? That standing in someone else's belongings felt like stepping into a world where no one could shout at him? He shook his head instead. "I don't know." Dr. Harris exhaled softly. "You're not in trouble. I'm trying to understand." But Daniel wasn't ready to be understood. Not yet. For months, he went to therapy twice a week. He spoke about the fights at home. About his mother's apologies. About the nights he hid in his room while his father prowled the hallway. He didn't talk about the duffel bag again. Still, something had changed, not inside him, but around him. Teachers looked at him differently. Counselors kept calling him in for check-ins. His mother hovered more than usual. His father glared at him with suspicion, like he was a ticking bomb about to explode. The truth was, Daniel didn't feel explosive at all. He felt hollow. A quiet, echoing emptiness followed him everywhere. At school. At home. In the mirror. Nothing filled it, not the shoes, not the secret collection, not even the fear he felt during the thefts. The emptiness became its own hunger. By 16, Daniel had learned to be careful. He still stole, but rarely. He chose places with crowds, places where no one looked twice at a shy teenager with his hands in his pockets. He never took too much from one location. He never took from the same person twice. He told himself it was just a habit now, a strange, private ritual that hurt no one. But sometimes he thought about Sarah Miller, the college student from 2 doors down, and how her voice had sounded when she'd asked the landlord whether he had seen her belongings. Worried. Confused. He didn't like remembering that. He told himself he wasn't doing anything wrong, not really. He told himself a lot of things. The first time he followed someone, it wasn't planned. He was walking home from school in late autumn, leaves crunching under his shoes, the light fading early behind thick gray clouds. Ahead of him, a girl named Emily Carter walked alone, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her blonde ponytail swinging with each step. Daniel knew her face from English class. She laughed easily, surrounded by friends, her notebooks filled with doodles and neatly written assignments. She seemed untouched by the kind of chaos that lived in his house. She didn't see him behind her. He didn't intend to follow, he just kept walking, steps falling into the same rhythm as hers. The wind lifted the hem of her dress, revealing the soft outline of her shoes. White flats. Scuffed at the toes. Delicate. His throat tightened. He slowed down, letting her get farther ahead. But when she turned onto the next street, he turned too. When she crossed at the corner, he crossed too. Not because he planned to. It just happened. His pulse thudded in his ears. The emptiness inside him fluttered with something sharper, something alive. When Emily reached her house and jogged up the porch steps, Daniel ducked behind a row of hedges across the street. The porch light flicked on. She opened the door, waved to someone inside, and disappeared. Daniel didn't move for almost a full minute. Then he backed away slowly, breath unsteady, and walked home with shaking fingers. He told himself he had only been walking. Just walking. That he would never cross that line again. But he had felt something. A pull. A direction. And once he felt it, he couldn't unfeel it. 2 weeks later, he followed another girl. A month after that, another. He began to notice more, the soft sound of footsteps on pavement, the quick breaths of someone turning a corner, the way people's shoulders tensed when they sensed someone behind them. He memorized routines, which students took which roads home, which ones walked alone after club meetings, which ones lingered on quiet streets at dusk. It never went further than watching. But inside him, the hollow space kept growing teeth. By 17, the school recommended residential psychiatric treatment. Dr. Harris agreed. His mother cried. His father refused to sign the forms until the court stepped in. Daniel spent 16 months in a youth psychiatric facility 2 towns over. He underwent evaluations, group therapy, behavioral programs. Doctors said words like compulsion, attachment disorder, trauma response, emerging behavioral risk. Daniel nodded, listened, and waited for release. He didn't tell them how much he missed the thrill, the electricity of slipping something into his jacket, the quiet power of walking behind someone who didn't know he was there. He didn't tell them because part of him believed he could smother it. Bury it. Outgrow it. When he turned 18, they let him go. Released with warnings. Released with optimism. Released with no idea what he would become. Freedom felt strange to Daniel Cole. After more than a year inside the facility, with its scheduled meals, supervised breaks, and quiet hallways that smelled faintly of disinfectant, the outside world seemed too bright, too noisy, too loose at the edges. The air felt colder. The sky felt bigger. People passed him on the street without a second glance. For a time, Daniel convinced himself that this new version of life might hold something for him. He found a job sweeping floors at a hardware store. He rented a tiny room above a garage behind an elderly couple's house. He kept his head down, stayed quiet, and tried to believe the doctors were right, that he could choose a different path. In the evenings, he walked through town, hands deep in his pockets, breathing the smell of pavement and wood smoke. He passed families eating dinner around kitchen tables. Couples laughing together on their porches. Groups of teenagers clustered outside convenience stores, their voices bright and careless. He wondered what it might feel like to be one of them. Normal. Untouched by the shadows he carried. He met Anna by accident, though he would later think of her as the closest thing to fate he'd ever experienced. She was working the register at a small diner where he sometimes went for coffee. She had warm brown eyes, a soft voice, and a smile that felt like light. Anna didn't flinch when he spoke. She didn't judge him for being shy. She didn't probe or push. She simply treated him like a person, something he wasn't used to. Daniel felt himself lean toward her presence the way a plant leans toward sunlight. They talked slowly at first, brief comments about the weather, simple questions about work, small jokes exchanged with tentative smiles. Anna, kind and steady by nature, didn't seem to notice how carefully he watched her. How much the gentle rhythm of her voice anchored him. After several months, she asked if he wanted to join her for a walk after her shift. He agreed. They strolled down Main Street beneath the glowing street lamps, the night humming with distant traffic and insects buzzing in the trees. She talked about her childhood, her dreams, her hope to go back to school. Daniel listened intently, absorbing every word like someone starved. When he finally said something about his own past, something vague, softened, edited, she didn't recoil. She just nodded and kept walking beside him. He wasn't used to kindness that didn't come with conditions. It made something in him twist and tighten, a feeling he mistook for love. Within a year, they were married. It happened quietly, in a courthouse with mismatched chairs and a judge who had seen too many small-town weddings to react to yet another nervous young couple. Anna wore a simple white dress, her hair curled at the ends. Daniel stood stiffly beside her, hands trembling ever so slightly. He loved the way she looked. Loved the way she held his arm. Loved the idea of being someone who could make her smile. But he also knew that love didn't erase anything inside him. It just covered it, thinly, like paint over rotting wood. They moved into a small rental house near the edge of town. Anna found work at a nearby daycare. Daniel took a job at a warehouse, stacking boxes, loading trucks. It was simple work, orderly, predictable. He liked that. At first, married life felt almost peaceful. Anna filled the house with warmth, soft blankets, second-hand furniture, flowers on the table. She laughed easily. She touched his arm when she passed him in the kitchen. She kissed him softly at night. Daniel wanted to be the man she believed he was. He truly did. But his impulses didn't fade. They simply adapted. It began with small things: a pair of sandals he found abandoned behind the laundromat, a scarf left draped over a bench at the park. He told himself he was only taking things that were already lost. But soon, he was wandering outside after dark, his steps guided by the same old hunger. He spotted items left on porches, laundry hanging behind houses, bags forgotten in unlocked cars. He didn't steal often, not at first. The fear of being caught, of Anna finding out, kept him cautious. But each time he brought something home, adrenaline surged through him like a quiet storm. He hid the items in a shoebox in the attic crawlspace, behind insulation and dust. He arranged them neatly, carefully, almost reverently. It wasn't about wanting the objects themselves. It was about the feeling, the same electric spark he'd felt as a boy slipping into his mother's shoes while chaos raged outside the door. Anna grew pregnant a year into their marriage. She was radiant with excitement, glowing with the quiet joy of someone who finally felt her life taking shape. Daniel sat beside her during appointments, holding her hand while the doctor spoke. He nodded at the right times. He even smiled for photos. But inside, something dark churned. The more Anna's attention shifted toward the baby, the more Daniel felt the old emptiness clawing its way back. His secret collection grew. His nightly wanderings lengthened. On some nights, he followed women walking home, keeping distance, staying in the shadows, listening to the rhythm of their footsteps. He never approached. But the urge to step closer, to reach out, grew stronger with every passing month. Their son, Michael, was born in early spring. Anna wept when she held him for the first time. Daniel stared at the tiny newborn in her arms, overwhelmed by a mix of awe and fear. The infant's cries pierced the room. His fingers were curled tightly into little fists, his eyes squeezed shut. Daniel wanted to feel what Anna felt, pure joy, full and bright. But he didn't. Instead, he felt something cold settle inside him. Responsibility. Pressure. Expectation. The weight of needing to be a good father, a better man, suffocated him. And every night, when the baby cried and Anna slept through sheer exhaustion, Daniel found himself standing in the hallway, staring at the front door, fighting the urge to slip outside. Some nights, he lost the fight. The escalation started subtly. A door left unlocked. A window cracked open. A shadow moving where it shouldn't. The first time he stepped into a stranger's home, he told himself he only wanted to look. The house was dark, the rooms quiet except for the ticking of a clock in the living room. He moved slowly, breath shallow, heart pounding. On the dresser in the bedroom, he found a pair of ballet flats. He picked them up gently, turning them over in his hands. He stood there for almost a full minute, frozen between fear and fascination. Then he slipped out as silently as he had entered, the shoes hidden under his jacket. He knew it was wrong. He knew it was dangerous. But after that night, nothing inside him wanted to go backward. Months later, Anna noticed how often he disappeared after dark. "Daniel," she said gently one evening, rocking Michael in her arms, "you're not sleeping. You're wandering. Talk to me." He stared at her, unable to form a lie that sounded convincing. "I just need air," he finally muttered. Anna didn't push. She trusted him. That would become the quiet tragedy of her life. As the years passed, Daniel's behavior slid step by step into territories he once swore he would never cross. His urges sharpened, his boundaries thinned, and his nightly routines became rituals. His world was splitting in two, the loving husband he pretended to be, and the shadowed figure he became after midnight. He still believed he could control it. But beneath that belief, a darker truth was growing. His secrets had stopped being secrets. They were becoming a path. And soon, they would lead somewhere he could never return from. The night that changed everything was quiet, the kind of stillness that made the entire neighborhood feel suspended in air. A low fog clung to the ground, softening the glow of streetlights. Daniel walked slowly along the curb, hands buried in his jacket pockets, his breath curling in front of him in thin clouds. He hadn't meant to leave the house that night. Anna had fallen asleep early, worn out from work, and Michael had finally stopped crying. The house was peaceful. Warm. Safe. But peace felt foreign to him, fragile, as if touching it too long might break it. So he slipped out, leaving the living room lamp glowing softly behind him. His feet guided him toward the darker side streets, where dim porch lights cast long shadows and houses sat quiet under the blanket of night. He followed his usual path without thinking, past the park, down the alley behind the library, then toward the older neighborhood where the homes were close together and people felt comfortable enough to leave windows cracked for fresh air. Then he saw her. A woman walking alone, head down, a grocery bag clutched in her hand. Her steps were quick, not hurried but purposeful. Her dark hair was pulled back into a loose bun. She wore a pale coat and simple flats that clicked softly on the pavement. Something inside Daniel tightened. He followed at a distance, telling himself he would stop. That he was only walking. Only watching. The woman turned onto a dim street lined with aging houses. One porch light flickered faintly. A dog barked in the distance. She walked up the path to a small home with peeling paint and paused to balance the grocery bag on her hip while searching for her keys. Daniel stood half-hidden behind a hedge across the street. Her back was turned. Her door was half open. He could hear the faint hum of a television inside. He told himself to turn around. Walk away. Go home. But the hunger had grown too large. Too sharp. Too alive. And in that moment, something inside him snapped, a thin, invisible line that had been stretched almost to breaking since childhood finally gave way. Daniel crossed the street. The woman, whose name was later identified as Laura West, never made it inside her home. What happened next unfolded in a blur, a sudden, desperate struggle, a muffled cry swallowed by the fog, a moment where instinct eclipsed thought entirely. When it was over, Laura lay still in the shadows. The grocery bag lay tipped over beside her, apples rolling quietly along the sidewalk. Daniel froze. This hadn't been planned. Not like this. The shock of what he'd done raced through him in jagged waves. His hands shook as he pulled Laura's coat closed. Her pale flats remained neatly on her feet, untouched, but his gaze lingered on them for one suspended moment before he forced himself to look away. A dog barked again, louder this time. A window opened down the street. Daniel panicked. He pulled Laura's body into the narrow alley beside her house, heart pounding so loudly he was sure the entire neighborhood could hear. He hid her behind a cluster of trash bins, then backed away slowly, stumbling, breath ragged. He didn't take anything. He didn't stay to look. He simply ran. That night haunted him for weeks. At work, he dropped tools. At home, he paced the house, unable to sit still. Anna noticed the tremor in his hands, the way he startled at small sounds, the shadows under his eyes. "Daniel," she whispered one night, touching his arm, "something's wrong." He wanted to confess everything, the panic, the guilt, the pieces of himself he couldn't understand. But as soon as he opened his mouth, the words dissolved into nothing. Instead, he lied. "I'm just tired." Anna kissed his forehead gently. She believed him. Daniel wished he could be the man she saw. 2 weeks later, Laura's disappearance became local news. Her photo, smiling, bright, appeared on missing person flyers taped to telephone poles, shop windows, and bus stops. Reporters gathered outside her home. Police went door to door. Candlelight vigils were held at the park. Anna watched the coverage with tears in her eyes. She was so young, she whispered. She lived alone. Can you imagine how scared she must have been? Daniel stood behind her, feeling his chest tighten around each word. He nodded silently. Police asked the public for leads. Volunteers combed the wooded areas outside town. Search teams walked through the tall grass along the highway. Daniel avoided those areas entirely. When Laura's body was eventually found, hidden near an abandoned shed outside town, the community reeled. People panicked. Women walked in groups. Porch lights stayed on until dawn. Rumors spread quickly, dark and frantic. The police announced they were investigating a possible pattern. Daniel stopped sleeping altogether. But instead of pushing him away from danger, the fear twisted inside him, changing shape. It didn't diminish his impulses, it intensified them. The surge of adrenaline from that night had carved a path he didn't know how to step away from. Within months, the hunger returned. It started with watching again, women at bus stops, women leaving work late, women walking home with headphones in. He memorized routes, routines, habits. He stalked shadows like they were familiar rooms. And then, inevitably, he crossed the line again. The second woman disappeared in late autumn, a college student named Megan Holloway. She was last seen walking to her car after a study session. Her disappearance shook the community even harder than Laura's. Flyers lined every storefront. Police increased patrols. A special task force was formed. Daniel watched it all unfold with sick fascination and creeping dread. Megan's case was different, more violent, more chaotic. Daniel had acted faster, rougher, more driven by impulse than fear. The control he felt afterward only cemented the pattern forming in his mind. He told himself he could stop. That he wanted to stop. But after Megan, stopping no longer felt possible. Over the next several years, disappearances trickled through nearby counties, spaced far enough apart that police treated them as isolated tragedies. Each case carried its own grief, its own unanswered questions. And Daniel became meticulous. He learned to hide evidence. He learned to move bodies to places difficult to search. He learned what investigators overlooked. He constructed rituals, quiet steps he followed every time, ways to keep himself grounded, in control. He collected items again, but now they weren't stolen from homes or laundromats. They were taken from scenes he crafted carefully, items he kept wrapped and hidden in a locked wooden chest buried beneath insulation in the attic of their home. Each item held a story no one else knew. Each one deepened the darkness inside him. Anna never suspected. She was busy raising their son, working, trying to keep their family afloat. Daniel was quiet, withdrawn, always tired. She thought he was stressed, worn down by work, haunted by his difficult childhood. She tried to help him. Loved him harder. Gave him more patience than anyone else ever had. But she was living beside a man slowly being consumed by the hunger he'd carried since boyhood, a hunger that no love, no therapy, no normal life could silence. And soon, investigators would begin seeing the connections he'd worked so hard to hide. Because one ritual, one night, one mistake was about to unravel everything. A survivor. A witness. Someone who would finally speak his name. Her name was Erin Blake. 23 years old. A nursing student. Independent, confident, the kind of person who kept a strict routine, early classes, late shifts, a familiar path home each night. She lived alone in a small apartment on the border between two counties, a detail that would later complicate jurisdiction and almost cost her life. Daniel noticed her long before she ever noticed him. He watched her casually at first, from a distance, hidden among crowds near the hospital, the noise and fluorescent lights masking his presence. Her stride was purposeful, her eyes focused, her mind always somewhere else. She seemed unaware of the world around her, the unpredictable dangers hiding in the margins. Daniel memorized her schedule the way others memorize songs. Mondays and Wednesdays, she left class just past dusk. On Fridays, she took the long route to her apartment, stopping at a grocery store that stayed open late. She wore practical shoes, sneakers most days, sometimes low black flats when she worked clinical hours. She carried a heavy bag slung diagonally across her body. He followed her for weeks, the hunger returning with full force, sharp and consuming. But Erin was different from the others. Not because Daniel felt anything like remorse. But because she fought. The night it happened, the sky was dark without stars, clouds rolling low and heavy. A storm had passed earlier, leaving the streets slick and glistening under intermittent streetlights. Erin walked the familiar route home, her footsteps splashing quietly in shallow puddles. Daniel waited in the shadows behind the old stone bridge at the end of her street, the place he knew she passed every night. His heart hammered with anticipation, fear, and something colder, a steadiness he mistook for control. As she approached, he stepped forward. Quick. Silent. Precise. He grabbed her from behind, one arm clamping around her torso, the other covering her mouth. Erin stiffened, a muffled sound caught in her throat, but then something unexpected happened. She fought like her life depended on it. She twisted, kicked, clawed, biting into the skin of his hand so hard he felt her teeth break the surface. The pain startled him. Disoriented him. She swung her elbow backward, hitting him just under the ribs. He staggered. In the chaos, Erin managed to wrench free and stumbled toward the street, screaming for help. Daniel panicked. He lunged. But a car was turning the corner, headlights sweeping across the road, bright and sudden. Erin threw herself toward it, waving frantically. The vehicle screeched to a stop. A moment later, the driver rushed out, yelling, demanding to know what was happening. Daniel vanished into the shadows like a ghost slipping underwater. Erin survived. Barely. She was trembling when officers arrived, scraped, bruised, shaking, but alive. She gave a statement, voice quivering, breath hitching as she described the attack. She hadn't seen his face clearly, but she remembered pieces, the roughness of his jacket, the smell of engine oil on his clothes, the deep scratch she'd left across his hand. Investigators listened closely. A county-wide alert went out. A sketch artist met her the next morning. Erin described what she could, not perfect details, but shapes, impressions, the faint outline of a man who had waited in the dark. The sketch was vague. But it was enough. Because it resembled someone already on file. Someone who had been evaluated for compulsive behavior as a teen. Someone whose early records mentioned patterns requiring long-term supervision. Someone the task force had begun to side-eye quietly in recent months as missing person cases started forming connections. Daniel Cole. Detectives had suspected him twice before, but lack of evidence stopped them from going further. He kept to himself. No criminal record. A quiet job. A family. A perfectly normal exterior. But Erin's detailed account, the height, the build, the wound she'd inflicted, gave investigators what they had been missing, a direction. 2 days after the attack, detectives knocked on Daniel's door. Anna answered, holding Michael on her hip. She smiled gently, unaware that her entire world was about to split open. Mrs. Cole, one of the detectives said, "We'd like to ask your husband a few questions." Anna frowned, confused. "Is something wrong?" Daniel appeared behind her in the hallway. He kept his face still, neutral, the way he always had when confronted with something he couldn't immediately control. "We just need to clear up a few things," the detective said. Daniel nodded slowly. "Of course." But the moment he stepped outside onto the porch, the detective's eyes caught the bandage on his hand. A long, jagged wound. Angry and red. Aaron's mark. The detectives shared a quick, sharp look, the kind of silent communication that meant everything had just changed. "Mind telling us how you got that?" one asked casually. Daniel hesitated. Anyone else might have offered a simple explanation. A cut at work. A tool slip. An accident while fixing something in the garage. But Daniel froze. A moment too long. A moment that told them everything. That hesitation opened the door. Detectives requested a warrant. A search team arrived within hours. Anna stood in the front yard holding her crying son, confusion and fear rising in her eyes as officers streamed inside the house. Neighbors gathered nearby, whispering, staring. The attic was the last place they searched. Dust coated every beam. Cobwebs clung to the walls. Justin, one of the officers, almost missed the wooden panel near the far corner, a section that didn't match the rest. Behind it lay the trunk. Locked. Thick wood. Heavy metal latch. Buried beneath insulation. When they pried it open, the room fell silent. Inside were items wrapped carefully in cloth, arranged with unsettling precision, shoes, scarves, rings, small personal belongings that matched descriptions from multiple missing person reports over the years. Evidence. Patterns. Connections. All hidden in a single box. The lead detective closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. They didn't yet know how far this went. But they knew who was responsible. Daniel was arrested on the front lawn. Anna stared at him, pale and shaking, clutching Michael protectively as officers read him his rights. Tears streamed down her face, not from understanding, but from the shock of watching her husband, a man she had trusted for years, being handcuffed while neighbors looked on. "Daniel," she whispered, voice breaking, "what did you do?" He didn't answer. He didn't look at her. He simply stared ahead, expression empty, as if the mask he'd worn for decades had finally dissolved. Detectives loaded him into the back of the patrol car. The door slammed shut. And for the first time in his life, Daniel Cole could no longer hide. Because inside the station, a survivor was waiting. Ready to identify him. Ready to speak the truth he had spent years burying in silence and shadows. The interrogation room was cold, illuminated by a single buzzing light that cast sharp shadows across the table. Daniel sat with his hands cuffed in front of him, fingers motionless, shoulders tight. He didn't look around. Didn't ask questions. Didn't request a lawyer. He simply waited. Detectives entered slowly, carrying thick folders and a quiet certainty born from years of chasing cases that never had answers. Today, the answers were finally within reach. Across the hall, Erin Blake sat with an officer, trembling but determined. She felt the weight of the moment, fear, resolve, lingering shock, but she refused to leave until she did what she came for. When detectives asked her if she was ready, she nodded. They led her to the viewing room, a narrow space with a one-way mirror. Erin stepped inside, gripping the edges of her sleeves as if anchoring herself. Her reflection blurred into darkness as she focused on the man in the other room. Daniel looked smaller without the shadows. His neutral expression. His stiff posture. The bandage on his hand. The jacket folded neatly on the back of his chair. "Take your time," the detective said quietly beside her. Erin exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on him. "That's him," she whispered. I'm sure. That's the man who attacked me. Her voice did not shake. The officer wrote her statement. And with that confirmation, everything accelerated. Inside the interrogation room, detectives laid out photographs, missing persons, search sites, items recovered from the attic trunk. Each image landed on the table like a weight added to a scale tilting irrevocably downward. Daniel's expression didn't change. But something in his eyes shifted slightly when they showed him the trunk, the careful arrangement of items, the rituals he thought were invisible. "Daniel," one detective said softly, "we know. We have enough to move forward. But we need you to speak." For a long moment, silence settled over the room. Then Daniel leaned back, exhaled, and spoke with startling calm. "How many do you want to hear about?" The detective froze. That single sentence rewrote everything. Until that moment, they believed he might be responsible for 3, maybe 4 disappearances. But the look in his eyes said the real number was much higher. The truth hit the room like a sudden chill. Another detective slid a recorder onto the table and pressed the button. "Start from the beginning." Daniel did. He talked for hours, voice steady, tone even, describing moments with unsettling clarity and no trace of remorse. He spoke about the night fog on Laura West Street, the panic that followed Megan Holloway's final steps, the items he collected and stored like trophies of a life he never controlled except in these darkest moments. Detectives listened in grim silence, writing furiously, exchanging horrified glances. When he finished, the room felt hollowed out. Not because the confession brought closure, but because some details were too precise, too cold, too practiced, the thoughts of a man who had lived 2 lives for decades, unbothered by the devastation he left behind. The trial drew national attention. Courtrooms filled with reporters, families of victims, law students, and locals who couldn't believe the quiet father from their community had lived with such darkness. Anna attended only once. When she entered the courtroom and saw Daniel sitting expressionless beside his attorney, something inside her shattered. She held their son close, as if shielding him from the truth. Daniel didn't look at her. He stared forward, unblinking, as witnesses testified, detectives, forensic specialists, neighbors, and finally, Aaron Blake. Her voice was steady as she described the attack, the fear, the moment she escaped. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge remained still, absorbing every detail. Aaron didn't look at Daniel until the very end. When she finally did, her gaze was unwavering. "You didn't take my life," she said. "You only showed me how much I wanted to keep it." Daniel blinked once, the only flicker of response he gave during the entire trial. The prosecution built an unbreakable case. Forensic evidence. Items from the attic trunk. DNA recovered from remains. Patterns matched across counties. Expert psychological profiles. The confession, chilling, detailed, undeniable. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life without the possibility of parole. Families in the courtroom cried, some in grief, some in relief, some because no sentence could ever fill the hollow space left behind. Daniel was led away in chains. He never turned back. Prison did not change him. He lived quietly, keeping to himself, neither violent nor remorseful. Counselors tried to reach him early on, but conversation stalled quickly. His mind wandered to the same obsessions he'd carried since childhood, patterns he never dismantled, urges he never tried to understand. He filed appeal after appeal, each one rejected, each one eroding what remained of his imagined control. But even then, the emptiness inside him persisted, unchanged and unchangeable. He grew older. Thinner. His hair turned gray at the temples. His cough worsened every winter. And eventually, a long illness settled into his lungs, tightening its grip year after year. No family visited. Anna remarried quietly years later. Their son grew up far from Daniel's name, shielded from the legacy that could have followed him. In his final months, Daniel stayed mostly in the prison infirmary, staring at the ceiling for hours at a time, expression unreadable. Nurses asked if he wanted to contact anyone. He refused. His life ended the way it began. In silence. When the news of his death reached the families of the victims, reactions varied, some relieved, some hollow, some angry that he had taken the truth of unanswered questions with him. Erin Blake visited the memorial garden built in honor of the missing women. She placed a single white rose on the bench dedicated to survivors and stood there quietly, letting the cold wind brush her cheeks. She wasn't mourning him. She was reclaiming her life. A community moved forward slowly, tenderly. No single ending could ever undo the years of grief. But they rebuilt what they could, honoring the memories of those taken too soon. And the story of Daniel Cole, a boy shaped by violence, a man swallowed by obsession, became a warning whispered across generations. Darkness doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hides in plain sight. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it lives next door.